Ahoy, this is your captain speaking. I'd like to just kind of do a little bit of a shorter off the cuff video today about answering the question of how many stars are there in our universe. Let me start by kind of talking about something that I'm sure everyone here has done, which is, kind of looking up at the stars at night and just wondering how many of them are up there. Of course, we can't, really see all the stars in the universe. There's a lot of stuff in the way. Many of them are very far away, but we can see many of the brighter ones here in the Milky Way, our own galaxy, depending on where you're at on the planet. Of course, light pollution seems to always get in the way of that. I know that very well being in a city. And it may be tempting to think the answer is unreachable. We don't know how many stars there are. The universe is too big or too mysterious for that. But while there are some small caveats, we do have a pretty good guess. So let's go ahead, break down the math. It's actually very simple. Don't be afraid. You don't have to do any math on your part. I'll do it all for you. But we do have a good guess at just how many stars there are in the universe. Okay, so first off, we need to know how many stars are in a galaxy on average. There's a lot of, variation in galaxies. Of course, no two galaxies are going to have exactly the same number of stars. There are irregular galaxies, which are more shaped like blobs than the galaxies you would usually expect, like bar or spiral galaxies, right? Like we're in a spiral galaxy in the Milky Way. That's the one most people recognize. So we're kind of going to use estimates for like average spiral galaxies, which are very common. Irregular galaxies are usually much smaller as well, as far as I understand. And though there can be some really dense ones, that just means they end up having, sort of similar amounts of stars on a scale to that of bar or spiral galaxies, as I understand. So on average, we can estimate that galaxies usually have about 10 to the 11th or 10 to the 12th power of stars. Now, let me tell you, that's a number we can actually assign a word to. 10 to the 12th power is a trillion. So there are, on average, about a trillion stars on the upper end per galaxy on average. On the lower end, it's 100 billion. So still a very large number. Every single galaxy, on average, has at least 100 billion stars by our estimate. That means the Milky Way, it contains at least 100 billion stars, if not a trillion. And the number could be more or less, of course, but that's probably the range it's in. That gives you an idea of how many stars there are for every galaxy. So after that, we, of course, need to figure out how many galaxies there are in the universe then, approximately. That's a lot tougher to figure out than stars in an average galaxy because, we can, of course, see our galaxy and nearby galaxies. Our galaxy is a little tougher because of the occlusion that happens because of all the dust and stuff. We're trying to peer into our own galaxy from the outer edge, and there's a lot of stuff between us and the rest of it. So we unfortunately can't see a lot of our own galaxy, but we can see a lot of other galaxies, and we can see that a lot of them are the same, and they have structures that match, what the Milky Way should have. So that's how we can calculate that. We're probably in a relatively average galaxy, a spiral galaxy. But as you go further out, of course, galaxies get a little bit different. The spacing between them gets different, of course. The early universe has a different amount of galaxies of different kinds, right? Because early on, formation was a lot different, and now a lot of mergers have occurred, and there are different scales of celestial objects like supermassive black holes, which can cause really dramatic effects. So the early universe, of course, is hard to account for. But if we want to consider like the majority of the universe, we can say that there are, good guess, funny enough, coincidentally, the same number of galaxies in the universe as there are stars in a galaxy on average. So about 10 to the 11th or 10 to the 12th. So 100 billion to a trillion galaxies in the universe. That's our best guess. Of course, again, more or less is totally rational to think. It's totally possible. But that being said, that's kind of the range we're in. So that gives us actually a really nice round number that you can remember for how many stars there are in the universe. It's not some, there's two ends of the scale this could be on, right? It could be on either end of the extremes. A lot of people might underestimate the size of the universe right? These are large numbers we're talking. No one's really going to think of anything on this scale usually, unless we're talking about the entire universe. Nobody's perfect, so, not to shame anybody, but I've heard answers of like 1,000 stars in the universe, and I've heard, some people getting a little more, closer to the answer with something like saying like 1,000,000 or something. And, that's really far off from the actual answer, right? But it's good to know how many stars there actually are in the universe. While it's not that little number, it's also not a humongous number that we absolutely can't even really say in normal everyday conversation. It's not like a where you say there's a Googleplex of stars in the universe and someone looks at you and goes, I don't know what that is, buddy, but all right. Right? No, this is a representable number. So when you multiply 10 to the 11th to 10 to the 12th power by itself, you get 10 to the 22nd all the way up to a maximum of 10 to the 24th. And that at the maximum is a trillion trillion. That is a trillion times a trillion. You get 10 to the 24th, a trillion stars in the universe. That's our answer. A trillion stars. Not just a trillion stars, but a trillion times a trillion stars, which is a lot of stars, right? That's a lot of stars. And, right now we kind of think that a lot of galaxies weren't going really crazy on the star formation early on in the universe. But, we're starting to see, as we look further back with telescopes like James Webb, we're starting to see that the early universe does have some surprisingly active galaxies. And it may come to be that there are even more galaxies and stars than we ever could have guessed. So this number could increase. It definitely could increase. I don't suspect it's any lower than that. I think that's a good range, but I would say that number could increase dramatically depending on the results of our studies of the universe. But I'm no cosmologist. I won't weigh in on that. And that's all. That's the answer. A trillion. So nice little piece of trivia there. If anyone ever asks you how many stars in the universe, you could say somewhere in the ballpark of a trillion. That's it. That's the answer. There you go. Okay, now for another great question. If the planets orbit their stars, then what do the stars orbit? Even better, we do actually have a pretty good idea. Check out the video linked on the end screen now, answering the question of what it is that every star in our galaxy, and indeed most all galaxies, seem to be orbiting. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a quick like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more about space, science, and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on our next trip.